All right, so I guess I'll start. Good evening, everyone. My name is Abhishek Jain, and I'm pleased to invite you all to the first episode of Plant's series on pursuing a career in teaching. Towards the end of this session, we will also be having a Q&A session, for which I would request you all to put your questions in the live chat box. Today, we are very fortunate to have with us Atharva Sontakke, a graduate from the 2017 batch of GNLU, who then went on to pursue his LLM from the London School of Economics and Political Science in 2018. He also cracked the UGC NET exam in 2019 and currently works as a full-time assistant lecturer at Jindal Global Law School. In this session, Atharva will be speaking in detail the process of how to become a qualified teacher, how to crack the UGC NET exam, and also certain opportunities available as a teacher. I would now like to hand it over to Atharva to begin the session.
Hi, Abhishek. I hope I'm audible to all. First of all, good evening to everyone. And a big thank you to Abhishek and the entire team for having me over and for this wonderful session. And I really appreciate the kind of work you've been doing, I think, through your other initiatives, not just the teaching series, but series on LLM applications, some of the other things which are so wonderfully documented on your website. So congratulations on that. And thank you for the generous introduction. So as you've rightly said, what I'll be speaking about today is a bit of my experience of law school and what prompted me to take up a career in academia, right? And how was my journey through law school into the LLM and then at the Jindal Law School right now. So what I'll basically do is speak for a few minutes about, as I said, my experience through law school. And I hope that my limited experience would perhaps shed some light to some of our viewers and listeners about what prompted me to take up a career in academia and, what kind of reasons should one ideally or should one look for before, joining academia? What are the reasons that one should look out for as to why I may want to join legal academia? Why may I want to, start a career in academics, in research, in teaching, etc. So I think hopefully my experience would shed some light on that. And after that, in the second part, I would probably like to, give an overview of some of the more practical points that you have raised as to how to actually go about building a career, or at least starting or qualifying for a career in academia, which is through LLMs, UGC NET, etc., etc. So maybe I'll briefly touch upon those more practical aspects as well, right? And then I'll be very happy to take up any questions that you may have or some of our audience members may have. So with that, just give me a moment. I'll just share a small PPT. I think that should be interesting. I think my screen should be visible now. Great. I hope the screen is visible and the PPT is visible. So as you rightly introduced, the topic for the discussion today is a career in teaching. And I have also sort of modified it slightly, and I've put and research in bracket, because I think if you look at a broader career in academia, not just legal academia, but for any subject for that matter, right? Teaching is only one aspect of academia. And in fact, depending on the university and the kind of research emphasis it has, research could actually be the more prominent aspect of what your role as an academic would involve, right? So a career in teaching would also involve a career in research, and therefore the two aspects simultaneously go hand in hand, right? You can't really disaggregate or segregate the two. So, which is why my talk would perhaps touch on both aspects and more broadly on a career in academia rather than just a career in teaching, right? So that's what the emphasis would be in the entire talk. So first of all, questions like what career should I choose, right? What is the purpose of my life? What is something that I would be happy doing for the rest of my life? I think these are the kind of questions that these are the kind of existential questions that I think haunt a lot of people. Uh, when they are in the undergraduate degree, especially in law school, because you spend a considerable chunk of time, in most cases a period of 5 years, or in some cases 3 years, at one institution doing one professional course. And I think these questions immediately start coming up when you start law school, right? What would I want to do after I graduate? Because the moment you enter law school, you always have 100 different people telling you 100 different things, right? You will find people who have tremendous clarity right from year one, right? They know that I want to, let's say, litigate, or they know I want to get into a law firm or something else, right? So there are those kind of people who have tremendous clarity right from the beginning as well. But I think in most cases, you will find people who are slightly confused. They don't know what to do. They try out different things. They don't know what they're passionate about, what they would be good at, etc. Right? So I think these kind of existential questions haunt almost every law student. And same situation was with me, right, when I joined law school, because I'm a first generation lawyer. I don't know anybody in my immediate or even my distant family who has ever done anything in the legal field, right? So it was completely a new field, a complete unknown to me when I started law school, right? So I'm sure when these questions are faced by students, I think the prominent answer to some of these questions, or the kind of immediate answer that a lot of us instinctively give to the question of, let's say, what should I do for a career, right? The instinctive answer is what you're passionate about, right? Follow your heart, right? That is the kind of mantra that we almost instinctively come up with, right? And that has been the mantra, especially for our generation, right? We are always told through popular culture, through movies, all our influences are such that we believe that what we are most passionate about is something that we should follow. And there is a lot of truth to that. I don't completely disregard or discard that point of view, but I think sometimes an overemphasis on that aspect is not enough, right? Sometimes it makes it difficult for people to actually make a decision as to what they want to do for a career, right? So passion is important, although that's not enough. It's just one aspect, right? But that's an important aspect, no doubt. So despite the fact that we all know that we should be following our heart, we should do what we're passionate about, yet I think, especially in law school, you'll find many students who uh, who are always confused, right? Who are terribly confused about what to do. They do this various kinds of internships, but they can't make up their mind. They're interested in some things, but they don't think it's going to help them build a career, etc., etc. So, despite almost everybody, knowing what they're interested in or what their passion is, yet finding the right career or the right path sometimes becomes extremely difficult, and there are various reasons for that, right? So, what I thought I'll do is just share with our viewers and listeners uh, my journey of law school, through LLM, and through my uh, very limited experience of legal academia as of now, right? And I hope that this will give some insight, some clarity to some of our listeners, at least, some of our viewers, at least, as to why, if they are interested, why should anybody take up legal academia as a career option? What are the things they should look out for, right? So I hope my journey shared some insight into those questions. Now, I'm someone who is, born and brought up in Mumbai, and I think ever since childhood, I was always someone who was good academically. and therefore, as it happens with most Indian kids who are good academically, the first instinct of every family is basically, you know, to try for IIT, right? That is the national obsession, one of the many national obsessions we have, right? So I also went through that phase. So in Maharashtra, you basically have this junior college system, right? Meaning your 11th standard and 12th standard. So in my 11th and 12th standard, I tried my hand at science because my marks in the 10th grade were great. So as it happens, you instinctively just go into science stream. And I tried my hand at the IIT JEE. I mean, I did not appear for the exam, although I was enrolled in a coaching class for a JEE, and I instinctively absolutely despised it. I hated it to the core, and I think that experience of just absolutely hating the experience of going through that preparation for IIT, I think just made my mind very clear about what I don't want to do, right? So this was not something I ever wanted to do. Uh, so in my childhood, I was often the kind of kid who would be more interested in books, in knowledge, constantly, going to bookshops, picking up random books, things like that. So I think for everyone, in their childhood, the childhood holds certain keys as to what their inclinations are, what their interests are. And I think people sometimes don't pay enough attention to some of their childhood memories when they are making a decision as to what do they want to do for a career. But I think that is very important because, as I said, childhood often holds that keys, right? The childhood of everyone has certain memories that stick with you, that definitely show you what your real inclinations are, what your real interests are. So as I said, I was the kid who would always be around books, love to read all kinds of stuff, always looking at newspapers, things like that. But there are others who may be more interested in other things. So there are some kids who are more interested in sort of opening up toys and seeing how they function. They try to open up, toy cars and look at how the internal functioning works. Or there are people who may be more inclined towards artistic or creative things. So I think sometimes it just becomes important to bring back those memories and see what your real inclinations are. And I think they're always a reliable guide as to what kind of career path one should take. And I was, as I said, always interested in some of these, more sort of, what do you say, sort of big questions. Like, I was always more interested in what's happening in society, what's happening in politics, why is the society the way it is, why does the world work the way it is, things like these, right? And therefore, considering my interests were more towards humanities, social sciences clearly, and not hardcore science, the whole IIT JEE experience really made my mind very clear as to what I don't want to do. And therefore, after dropping out of the IIT coaching, I was as clueless as anybody else, and I had no idea that there are these law schools and NLUs and CLAT, because as I said, nobody in my family ever had any relation with law or anything even remotely connected to law. Right? But somebody I remember told me, there are these NLUs, and you might want to check out. So I just very cursorily went through some of the CLAT papers, right? I looked at the questions and I thought, oh, look, this seems interesting. The questions seem very interesting to me because, the kind of stuff uh, CLAT questions are about is like general knowledge, current affairs, legal reasoning. All these aspects kind of instinctively interested me, right? And therefore, I just gave CLAT out of, sheer interest more than anything else. And luckily, I cracked it. I got to Gujarat National Law University in 2012, luckily. And my experience in undergrad law school was also, I think, uh, what can I say, uh, re-emphasized the fact that my inclinations were more towards academic matters, things like books. And so I was the one who always goes to the library and look at different kinds of books, read different types of books. May not be necessarily legal books, but all kinds of books, newspapers, things like that. I was always interested in writing blog posts, research articles, and student law reviews, right? So clearly, I realized that my inclinations were more towards the academic side of law rather than the more practical side of law, right? And in law school, what happens is, I think, over a period of 5 years, almost everybody ends up doing all kinds of internships, right? So even I went through the whole drill, right? I did internships in trial court, in high court, law firm, in-house, under a Supreme Court judge, a retired Supreme Court judge. So all kinds of internships, as I think most students usually go through, which is good in the sense that there are two aspects to it. Those varied internships, one, help you obviously in understanding the practical aspects of law, in the sense that how does law actually operate in court or in a trial court? How does it work in a high court? How does it work in Supreme Court, right? So if you're in a commercial law firm, for example, what are the kinds of questions that come up when you're doing a business, right? And how does law relate to that? What kind of services are lawyers required to do for operation of a successful business? So I think internships do expose you to all these practical aspects of law. So that's always great. But I think for me personally, the more important aspect that I learned through the internships was that those kinds of careers in law were not meant for me, right? So, although these internships definitely help you understand the practical aspects of law, they also do a lot to you personally, in the sense that they help you understand, are you temperamentally good for these kind of jobs, right? So unless you go to a court, do a 1 or 2 month internship, unless you do a 1 month internship at a firm or at an in-house company, right? You won't understand whether you are whether you're interested in, are you inclined to, or are you temperamentally suited for that kind of jobs. And I immediately realized that I was not suited for any of those things, right? Especially things like law firms, commercial law firms, in-house counsel. I tried that, and I immediately realized that this is not my cup of tea. In the sense that, uh, as I said, my interest towards law was more academic, in the sense that I was interested in some of these big questions, which help you understand society and things like that. And I thought that is not something I would be doing, or that is, those questions would not be addressed or would not be answered, or I would not get an opportunity to actually, look at some of those interesting big picture questions through a law firm job or through a litigation job, right? So that was like my primary lesson from my internship experiences. And the second thing that I probably learned was about myself was that I am someone who likes to work independently as much as possible, right? Working under a boss who's constantly on your head, right? Pushing you to, send an Excel sheet, in next 10 minutes, or making you work until late night, doing due diligence. I thought I was not cut out for that, right? Some people are, and I completely understand their inclinations. They are perhaps more interested in understanding how business operates, how law operates in commercial sense. So that's perfectly fine for those who are inclined to those kind of things, right? I thought I found out I was not. So that was another primary lesson I thought I learned from my internship. Now, given this whole experience, when I came in my fourth year at GNLU, I think it was almost time to like make a decision, right? Because by fourth year, your placements start, and you see everybody around you opting for 0 day placements or day one placements, applying to firms, etc., etc. So I was at that time I kind of made up my mind that, look, I'm not clear whether what I want to do. So at that time I was not clear I wanted to even go into academia. But what I knew was I was always interested in, as I said, the more academic, theoretical aspects of law. And because of that inclination, I decided I wanted to pursue an LLM, right? There were two reasons. First was obviously the intellectual curiosity to learn different subjects, to be exposed to different teaching styles, to do a lot of interdisciplinary, uh, research or to learn interdisciplinary subjects. That was one motivation. And the second motivation was that it'll give me one additional year to take a call as to what I want to do. So those were the primary motivations behind going for an LLM. And then I landed up at the London School of Economics. And my 1 year experience at the LSE, I think just, uh, you know, uh, again re-emphasized my inclinations. And I think it was that 1 year experience at LSE that really told me or convinced me that this is what I want to do for the rest of my life, right? Which is to get into academia, which is to live in this world of ideas and knowledge and books, right? I think that 1 year experience really convinced me of that. And more so, I think the 1 year experience at LSE really taught me how to access these knowledge systems in a better way. It equipped me in analytical skills, critical skills, writing skills, to be able to access the theoretical, philosophical aspects of law in a much more uh, nuanced manner. Because unfortunately, what happens is, during our 5 years of undergrad law school, very often our attention is more on understanding the basics of individual laws, right? So we are more interested in what are the foundations of contract. The professors always tell us, what does XYZ section say in Contract Act, or what does XYZ article of the Constitution say. So the emphasis in India tends to be more on the theoretical aspect, the substance of law, which of course is very important conceptually, no doubt about that. But I think sometimes we lose sight of the some of the larger goals, which is sharpening of your skill set, right? And what kind of skill set? Skill set which allows you to, or which better equips you to, you know, read texts analytically, critically, to look out what are the underlying assumptions of the authors, to look out what are the gaps in the literature, to look out what are the gaps in the argument, what is a strong argument, what is a weak argument, how to analyze these things. So I think these kind of skills, which are also very important practically, these skills are sometimes not emphasized enough in Indian law school. So I think that 1 year of LSE really uh, trained me in that. And I think that training just allowed me, as I said, to explore these academic inclinations in a much better way. And I think by the time I was in LSE, I had made up my mind that this is what I wanted to do, right? So with that, I made up my mind. But hey, as I said, passion, understanding yourself, understanding your inclinations, understanding your interests is one part of the story. And a lot of people I know struggle to even find that. But let's say once you found it, right? Is that enough? Often it's not, right? Because you may be passionate about n number of things. You may be passionate about, you know, playing cricket for India. You may be passionate about painting. You may be passionate about something else. But oftentimes, is that a pragmatic career choice or not? That answer is just slightly vexed. There's no straight answer. That just by following passion, you will be able to make a successful career. Now, the other aspect of this is passion is not enough. You also need to understand whether you're good at it, right? And people often don't undertake an honest self-assessment regarding these things, right? So we are passionate about 100 different things, but are we really good at something which we can then convert into a long-term career? I think that question people should ask before joining any career, but more so a career in academia, let's say, right? So to test out my abilities or skills, let's say for teaching, because I had not taught before at all, right? So in law school, you end up doing moots and debates. That's fine, and that I think is a good thing. It allows you to, allows you some training in at least speaking or debating and things like that. But teaching is a different ball game, right? And I had no clue as to whether I would be able to do it, despite making up my mind that a career in academia is what I want to do. So just to test out after coming back to India from LSE, I did a brief stint at IMS Coaching Center, and I was kind of taking some classes for students who are preparing for CLAT. And I think that gave me a interesting opportunity to just test out myself. Whether am I good at it? Can I actually do it for a long term? Uh, will students understand what I'm saying? Am I able to connect with them? Am I able to explain basic concepts of law to them? Right. So I think that brief stint at IMS really uh, gave me an insight into whether I'll be able to do this or not. And thankfully, the experience was largely positive. I thought this is something I could do for a long period of time. And after IMS, I then landed up at Jindal Law School as an assistant lecturer, and I've been here since August 2019. So it's been a year and a half, slightly more than that, maybe. And I've taught subjects like constitutional law, interpretation of statutes, intellectual property, some of the areas that I'm deeply interested in. And I think Jindal has allowed me, to really uh, take up topics that I am interested in, I am keen at. And so far the experience at Jindal has been really good for me. But what I want to convey through this sort of a journey is that what should one look out for when you are choosing a career in academia, right? So as I said, one should always do an honest self-assessment as to first what your inclinations are, what your real interests are, what you're passionate about. And for that, as I said, you know, go back to your childhood, look at what the things you used to love to do when you're a child, what kind of temperament you have, because I think those are important questions that often get overlooked before choosing a career. So I think for a career in academia, you would want someone who's deeply interested in, uh, the big questions, as I said, or somebody who's deeply interested uh, in understanding or at an abstract level how law functions, how societies operate, how law relates to those things, and if you're intellectually curious about those subjects, because that is the fundamental reason why one should get into academia, right? Because as I said, teaching is just one aspect, research is another aspect of it. So you really need to be completely curious about some subject, some subject in law or generally about law, to be able to build a long-term career, right? Because if your interests are not deep enough, if you're not really curious enough, you may lose out, or you may, the passion may just burn out in a few months or a few years. But if you're looking at it from a long-term perspective, then doing an honest self-assessment about your own inclinations, your own interests, is is exceptionally important, and also a self-assessment about whether you're good at it, right? So both these things, and not just these two things. I think a lot of you must have, must be knowing this Japanese Ikigai, right? And I really love the concept of Ikigai, because I think it really uh, sums up what one should do for a living in a wonderful diagram, right? So it's a unique intersection of what you love, what you're good at. So those two aspects I just spoke about from my experience, but also things like, some practical aspects, like what you can be paid for, right? Is there a actual career path in that particular line for you, right? So an assessment of that, right? Because at the end of the day, passion alone is not enough, right? You have to make sure that you are earning enough, right? So what you can be paid for, right? And also, I think a broader societal impact what your work may have, right? So I think what the world needs, in some senses, a responsibility towards the community in any way you may deem fit, right? And I think academia is something that very clearly allows one to do that. So I think before choosing a career in academia, one should sort of do an assessment of all these aspects. Obviously, it sounds a lot easier in theory than actually taking a decision, because it's not always where you will find that a perfect intersection of all these four circles, right? So it's never going to be that you will find a perfect harmony or perfect balance. But the attempt should be perhaps to try to find a reasonable kind of balance of all these aspects, and then taking a call whether you want to have a career in academia or not. Right? So I think that is something I wanted to share from my personal journey. But what I want to then briefly do is touch upon some of the more practical questions that some of our listeners or viewers may have about how to go about starting a career in academia, and what are the kind of minimum qualifications, how do you go about that, etc., etc. So a preliminary qualification, I think that is the basic minimum qualification, is to have an LLM degree, right? A master's degree in law. That is the first aspect before you want to build a career in academia. So if anybody is interested, I would say definitely you need to go for an LLM after you graduate. Now, a question that often comes up is an LLM abroad a much better alternative rather than an LLM in India? On balance, I would say a foreign LLM definitely does add more value to your profile, not only in terms of the weight of the university that you go to, but also, as I said, in terms of the experience that you gain doing an LLM abroad, some of the skill set that you develop. So I think, if possible, I would recommend a foreign LLM, and that also puts you at a better place when you're applying for, let's say, a teaching position in some of the Indian university. So, but I totally understand that it's definitely not something that everybody can do because of financial constraints, and LLM is very expensive, and not everybody can have that kind of privilege. So if not a foreign LLM, you can also go for an Indian LLM. There are some very good Indian LLM programs in India as well. Especially if you're very keen on a career in academia, then obviously you should look out even for an Indian LLM. That is like a basic minimum qualification, right? Then comes the aspect of UGC net, which I think almost terrifies a lot of people who want to do academia, because in some senses it is a very stringent test, in the sense that it kind of tests you on some of the basic concepts that you may have learned in your 5-year or 3-year law school program, right? So, and I think, as most students in law school really just mug up for exams last day, it's very difficult to sort of recall some of those concepts after you graduate sometimes. And considering the pattern of the exam is also very rigid, in the sense that the kind of questions they asked are not application based. They are things like, this article talks about what, these kind of questions. So it's not an application based test in that sense. So that kind of is daunting for a lot of people. So I'll just briefly tell you how I went about doing the preparation. What I did was basically first look at all the previous year's papers for UGC net. And I think if you closely study those papers, you'll get a very fair idea of the kind of questions that are asked, in the sense that the pattern is largely the same. You will have a certain number of questions from constitutional law, a certain number of questions from public international law, etc., etc. And the kind of questions are also pretty predictable, in the sense that they'll ask you about section numbers, article numbers, or at the most they'll ask you about some landmark judgments, cases in those areas of law, right? So the first step which I did was basically just look at bare provisions of all basic laws, so bare provisions of constitution, bare act of contract, property, family law, etc., etc., all the things that the syllabus mentions, right? And I think if you're just well versed with that by itself will take you pretty far in preparing for UGC net, because a bulk of questions are basically about these things. Just section numbers, section says what principle is incorporated in what section, these kind of things, right? So if you're well versed with that, I think you're almost on a very good footing. In addition to that, then you just look at some of the basic landmark judgments in those areas, as I said. So that's how I went about it. First, do a basic reading of the bare provisions, understand the basic concepts, and then just look at some basic judgments. And UGC net would not be very difficult for someone who has, through their 5 or 3 years of law school, actually paid some attention in classes, to be honest. In the sense that if you're well versed with some of the basic concepts while we were in law school, I think that just goes along a very long way to prepare you for UGC net. Which is why if you're well versed already with those concepts, then a quick brush up of the bare provisions, really is good enough. That's how I went about it. So some advice for people who are perhaps in law school currently would be to brush up on some of those basics, or keep those basics at the back of your mind every time, even after you graduate. It will help you really in cracking not just UGC net, but some of the other exams as well. Judiciary, if somebody's trying to prep for that, those kind of exams also, but more so for UGC net. So I think that is one advice I would perhaps give, and from my own experience. So UGC net is also one of the criteria for starting out as a assistant professor or as a lecturer in Indian universities. So that's the second sort of more practical, pragmatic aspect. The third one would be, this question which often comes up is, should I go for an LLM with a view to academia right after I graduate, or should I, work for a couple of years in, say, law firm or litigation, and then get into academia? Now, this is a vexed question, and I don't think there is one right answer to this. And different people would give you different advice depending, I think, on their own experience. What I would say is, if you have that clarity in your mind that you definitely want to go into academia and do nothing else, then I think it's pretty straightforward that maybe you could just directly do an LLM after you graduate and then look for a job in academia, right? Or maybe just continue and get a PhD before, right after your LLM also, something like that, if you're pretty clear in your head about that. Otherwise, you can, obviously work for a couple of years, take some experience, and then come into academia. Because the good thing about academia is you can always join in later, right? There's no age limit, there are no such formal criteria apart from LLM and UGC net, etc., etc. So the entry from practice to academia is always, or industry to academia is always, easy. You can do it at a later stage also. So that's one advantage of going for some experience and then coming into academia. But as I said, if you're very clear about it, you can just dive straight into it. I have done that. So it really depends on your inclinations, your resolve. Or in some cases, some students might not be clear as to whether they want to actually do it for a long term or not. So in that case, they want a backup option. Then maybe it makes more sense to, gain some work ex before in a firm or litigation or whatever. So that's the more practical aspect to this question of when you should sort of come into LLM or academia. But the other aspect which I would perhaps highlight is understand that although there are linkages between academia and law practice, I would prefer to look at it as two completely different modes of being or modes of existence, in the sense that your role as a lawyer in legal academia and your role as a lawyer in practice, be it litigation or commercial law firms or in-house counsel, is completely different, in the sense that as an academic, as someone who's interested in knowledge and trying to understand how law operates in society, etc., your outlook or your temperament is that of a detached observer trying to understand what's happening and trying to explain that, right? So you're like, you sort of zoom out from your position and try to analyze things in an objective, impartial manner as much as you can, right? That is the position of a scholar or an academic, right? You are slightly detached from the day-to-day practice of law, because your role is more to understand what's happening and explaining what's happening, right? So how is law impacting society? What is the consequence of this particular law, etc., etc. Right? So these kind of theoretical fundamental questions, that is the job of an academic to zoom out and try to understand these things. Whereas your role of a practical lawyer would be more attuned to the demands of your client, right? So, for example, as an academic, let's say there is some vexed question of law, constitutional law, right, that has come up. And as an academic, you may think that your argument, your intellectual argument, is the best possible argument to this particular question, in favor of this particular question, let's say, at an academic level. But if you were asking the same question to a litigator who's actually fighting that case in the Supreme Court, let's say, about that constitutional question, he or she would be less interested in trying to understand what is the academically best argument for it. The practicing lawyer, would more be interested in knowing what argument will sustain in court, right? So what argument will convince those 3 or 5 judges sitting on the bench, right? So if, let's say, a majority of the bench is of liberal orientation, or the majority of the bench is of conservative inclination, then what argument will convince those judges? That that practical assessment, or that practical argument, is relevant to the practicing lawyer, whereas an academic lawyer, you would perhaps be more detached and try to look at things in a more academic, intellectual, and abstract manner. And I think that's how the role of an academic differs from that of a lawyer who actually practices, be it in court or be it in commercial law firms. Because in both these situations, in law firms or in court, you are trying to get a favorable outcome, right? You're trying to assess the business as to what is the favorable outcome for them using the legal system, right? So your approach towards law in practice is more result oriented. It's a means to a certain end. Whereas as an academic lawyer, you are more of a detached observer trying to observe society, understand it, and explain it, right? So I think that difference of role in these two positions is something one should consider before deciding whether one to opt for a career in academia or to opt for a career in actual practice, right? Because I think this is a real differentiation, a real difference of approach in the two aspects of law and legal practice. And there are, of course, linkages between the two, in the sense that ideas from academia find their way in courts, or the practice of law finds its way back into academia. So there is this dialectic, or osmosis that happens between the two zones or two spheres. But I think the role of a lawyer is still, I would say, very different in both these zones, or both these spheres of existence, so to speak. So I think that is something, a practical aspect that one should consider before one makes up their mind whether they want to go in for academia, or work in a firm or litigate or things like that. So that is another sort of practical aspect. And finally, I would just want to say like one word about what is the current scenario as far as legal academia is in India. What are the opportunities? Should one really opt for it? In that sense, I would definitely say it is a good time for somebody who wants to get into academia, primarily because the kind of interest that law as a career option has generated in the last few years is tremendous. So when I gave CLAT in 2012, I remember the total number of applicants were about some 25-30,000. But I think 2019, 2020, the numbers were like 60,000, 70,000. So it has doubled in the past 5-6 years, right? So I think that tells you that there is demand. We need good people. We need intelligent people. We need the best and the brightest to come into academia as well, because currently a lot of them are diverted by corporate law firms, commercial law firms, and with good reasons. I'm not disputing that at all. But I think legal academia as a career option is also something that people should consider, especially the best and the brightest in our national law schools, I think should definitely consider. Obviously, I'm not going to say that the kind of remuneration that you would get right at the beginning would be the same as a tier 1 corporate law firm. It won't. Those concerns are definitely there. But I think if you're genuinely interested, if you're inclined towards it, then I think this is a good time for people to step into legal academia. So I think that has been my experience so far in legal academia, and those are the kind of insights I would perhaps share with all of you from my very limited experience. I'm sure you can talk to people who are into academia for years and decades, who have much more experience than me, and who be able to give you better insights. But I think my experience has been thus, and I hope you I think our viewers get some insight uh, into what goes into a career in legal academia, why one should opt for it, what is the kind of temperament one should have, what kind of inclinations I guess one should have as a basic requirement, so to speak, to get into academics as a profession. So I think that is it. I think I've taken up more than 40 minutes already. So I think I'll wind up with that. Thank you, Abhishek, for giving me the opportunity to come and speak to you and to our viewers. And with that, I'll just wind up, and I'll hand it over to you for any questions that you may have, or some of our audience members may have. I'll be very happy to take all of them. Thanks.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you so
Atharva.
much.
I think it was honestly a very, very, very good session. And the reason that I'm saying this is because you actually ran us through your personal experience step by step as to why you made every decision. And I think that really, really helps us when we're sitting here as students to actually understand how we could do the same with our own careers and lives. So thanks a lot for that. We do have a couple of very, very interesting questions. The first question is actually with respect to the UGC NET exam. So, could you elaborate a little bit more about if there are any necessary or mandatory preconditions in terms of degrees that you need to have? Like, is it necessary to have a master's degree? And could it be any master's degree? And also, could you elaborate a little bit about how long does it actually take to prepare for this exam?
Sure. So it's definitely mandatory to have a master's degree before you appear for the NET exam. So an LLM, in our case, would be the minimum eligibility criterion that needs to be fulfilled before you appear for UGC NET. Uh, so the thing is, an Indian LLM is usually uh, better in terms of NET, because what happens is, if once you clear it, like, you get a certificate. And what happens is, if you have an Indian LLM, the recognition is pretty quick, in the sense that UGC knows this is a recognized LLM. So some of the regulatory hassles don't really impact you. But if you have a foreign LLM, you can obviously appear for the NET, you can clear it, but sometimes the certification process takes up some time, because those foreign degrees would then have to be sort of given an equivalency, and that takes up a lot of time in our bureaucratic system. So that is one aspect I would warn some people about before appearing for UGC NET. And from what we've been hearing, in 2021, apparently new rules are going to come in, where a PhD is going to be made mandatory. So for assistant professorship. So the regulatory scenario at the moment is slightly unclear on that aspect. So we'll probably have to wait for those rules to come into enforcement, and then perhaps we'll get better clarity about UGC NET. But I think UGC NET still continues, and I think will continue at least for the foreseeable future as one route to get into academia. Regarding the second question, uh, how long does it take to prep? Look, I think there's no one answer. It really depends on, as I said, uh, how much grasp do you already have of some of the basic concepts. As I said, if you are somebody who is already well versed with some of the basic concepts, basic provisions, maybe you will take less time. But I think if you put a structured plan, I think a preparation time of anything about from 2 to 3 months would suffice. that is, if you place a structured plan to it, right? Not do it in the random spikes, but if you have a well-structured plan, I think you can easily prep for UG Senate in about 2 to 3 months if you're really serious about it.
All right. So I think my next question is actually very interesting because it's about how you mentioned of having a career in academia alongside your career in teaching. So, what sort of internships do you think a student should actually look for if they're trying to see if they are the right fit for a career in academia?
Right, that's an interesting question. So I think my first advice would be in your 5 years, expose yourself to all kinds of internships. Don't just look at one kind, even if you may have some clarity. Do look at all kinds, but especially for academia, uh, I would advise students to try to do some research assistantships with professors of different universities. You can reach out to them and see if they want some assistance in their research work, in their paper writing, things like that. So that gives you an idea as to how to go about writing a paper, a research paper, an article. That could be one way of going about it. The other would be not through or you could also have internships with think tanks, or some of the academically oriented think tanks. So in India, a lot of academically oriented think tanks you'll find. Because I'm more interested in those areas, especially in the areas of technology law, media law, these kind of things. You have a wonderful center at NLU Delhi, the Center for Communication Governance. You have various centers in Jindal Law School as well who do some interesting research. So you can reach out to some of these centers and universities, the professors who are heading those research projects there. That could be one way. Uh, Other way perhaps is not through internships, but out of your own initiatives. When you're in law school, try writing blog pieces, opinion pieces on online portals, newspapers. Try writing some research articles, short essays for student law reviews. Try your hand at that. Try to get comments from different academics on your paper, on your ideas. you know so that will give you an idea as to whether you can actually enjoy the process of, let's say, doing legal research, writing a paper. Because writing a good paper also requires a lot of hard work, right? So try that when you're in law school. Try to publish maybe something on some of the more prominent legal blogs, like Spicy IP for some people who are interested in intellectual property, or some of the online news portals, or try to approach some student law reviews. Some of the Indian law schools have fantastic student law reviews as well. NUJS publishes some very good journals. Nalsar, a lot of these universities have very good journals. So maybe you could approach those, try to get your articles published in those. I think that will give you a good assessment of whether you are up for it, whether you can day in and day out, read research material, read books, think, analyze, prepare an argument, and actually be able to deliver a good paper. So maybe that's also something students can do in law school, uh, along with the internships.
All right. So, just as a follow up to that, because I have a very interesting question here, is there anything that you think that if you had known in your first year about, let's say, pursuing a career in academia, that would have led you to do things differently?
So you're asking me what is one thing if I had known in my first year itself and I would have done differently? Well, that's an interesting question. I think had I known uh, my inclinations and my interests with better clarity, maybe I would have uh, taken up some different subjects when I was at my law school, or when I was at LSE, even for that matter. So, just to sort of illustrate that with an example, because I was always a science student in my school and my 11th and 12th grade, I just out of habit I ended up taking BSc LLB in Gujarat National Law University, because it's one of the universities which offers a BSc as well. And when I look back, I think had I known my interests with better clarity, maybe I would have stuck to a standard BA because I think I was always more interested in some of the social science, humanities oriented subjects like political theory, political science, political philosophy, those kind of aspects, which I didn't get formally get an opportunity to study formally in my undergrad. So some of that I tried to, because I got some clarity later, I tried to incorporate some of those at my LSC program. But the thing is, a master's program is usually very short. It goes about 10 months at best. And you can't really do a lot of things because there are, constraints in terms of the courses you can take, timetable clashes. So some of the things that maybe I would have studied even at LSC, now in hindsight, I feel maybe I should have taken some other course, right? But again, there is, it's not something I regretted because I think you'll always come up with these kind of explanations later, in the sense that you always feel when you look back, this is something I could have done differently because you gain clarity as you go along. So now when at Jindal, my interests are more towards, let's say, constitutional theory and things like that, or political philosophy, which I didn't really get to study in much depth uh, in GNLU or in LSC. So maybe had those interests been more clear to me, I would have tailored my undergrad as well as postgrad in a much more beneficial way. But then I don't regret it at all. I think for an academic there are no boundaries, right? I can so my research or my academic research interest, research profile can always come back to some of these issues that I'm interested in. So I don't think the formal training in this course is something I completely miss. But I think it would have been better had I had some basic understanding of some of these issues, which I now perhaps have to do right from scratch. But it's fine. I don't regret it, to be honest.
I think that's a very, very interesting take. But it's good to know that you still don't have any regrets about it, even though when you look at it in hindsight. I think that brings me to the last question for today's session. So, can you just elaborate a little bit about climbing up the ladder as a professor in the teaching profession? So, how exactly do you go up from, let's say, an assistant lecturer all the way up to a professor?
Right. So I think uh, the way things are working at Jindal is, you know, Jindal is actually one of the universities, very few universities, that has actually hired a lot of young faculty members. So I think some of my cohort, which joined along with me in Jindal in 2019, they're all very young people, just out of our master's degree or master's programs. So I think we are kind of in the infancy of our academic career, and I think the strict hierarchy that you will find in most universities in terms of academia is something that operates everywhere, which is you start off maybe, so in general, I'm an assistant lecturer, but in a normal NLU, perhaps you would be an assistant professor to start off with. Then, in universities that are bound by UGC regulations, you have certain criteria, which is that you need to fulfill certain number of years, you need to have certain publications to become an associate professor, and then from associate professor to a professor, right? So that's a long journey. The good thing is if you're starting out when you're young, you have an entire career ahead of you. So I think that gives you a lot of opportunity to climb up the ladder at a relatively young age. So on an average, let's say in an NLU, for example, or at least going by UGC regulations, I think I'm not exactly sure, but a period of about 5 to 7 years to jump from, let's say, assistant professor to associate professor, and then again from associate to a full professor. But that's just one. But the experience and number of years are just one aspect. You obviously need to have a very good research profile in most universities. So you need to have publications, you need to have research output, and I think that really helps much more than just putting in number of years into teaching. So the research component and the teaching component, the number of years, I think goes hand in hand, and that then sort of helps you climb the hierarchy.
All right. So I think that does bring me to the end of this session. So thanks a lot, Atharva. I think that was a very, very insightful session, and you've given us a lot of pointers about how we should go about this if this is something that we want to pursue. And you have definitely opened this up as a new career prospect for a lot of us who had absolutely no idea that this is something that we could actually try out after law school. So thanks a lot for that. I would just like to take this opportunity on behalf of Team Plant to just thank you once again for taking out the time to come for this session.
Thank you, Abhishek. Thanks for having me. It's been wonderful to talk to you and to our viewers. So thank you. Thanks a lot for having me.
Thank you.